Bike of the year is not a phrase that I use lightly, but when it comes to the Yeti SB165, it's definitely a phrase that I've got in mind. Stay tuned to find out why all the other bikes have got their work cut out in matching this thing in this long-term review on loamwolf.com. Let's go. Yes, this is the SB165, Yeti's longest travel enduro bike, and it's certainly a bike that they've designed to pack a bunch of capability and really offer performance for aggressive mountain biking. This is a mixed wheel, 27.5-inch rear, 29-inch front, 165mm, 170mm travel enduro bike, and it's only offered in Yeti's carbon frames, but in both the cheaper C-Series as well as the T-Series that we've got here. If you want to learn all the nitty-gritty details, then do head to loamwolf.com in the description below, where we'll really cover it all. But for now, I'm just going to focus on the key highlights of this bike. Yeti only provides this spec as standard with a coil rear shock. They've designed the kinematics to work best with that. However, of course, you can swap out that rear shock for an air shock if you so desire. It uses their Switch Infinity suspension system shared across their full suspension lineup, at least in the trail section and above, which uses that unique kind of two-rail slider in next to the bottom bracket to offer an infinitely long lower link to really tune the kinematics and provide a unique suspension performance that Yeti desires. This suspension platform allows plenty of room in the front triangle for a large water bottle, keeping you hydrated on your rides, and Yeti has also covered all the details in their typical high-end, high-quality fashion, so there's really good frame protection on there, including a huge down-tube guard. There's internal cable routing, which is fully guided and has proved to be mostly rattle-free, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And yeah, it's overall certainly a high-quality package, as you'd expect from a frame only with a rear shock for $4,800 and builds starting from $6,300 going all the way up to the $9,200 T3 EXO transmission that we tested here. This top-of-the-line T3 EXO transmission build that we tested, as I mentioned, comes in at $9,200. Yeti does also offer a carbon fiber wheel upgrade option for an extra $1,000, though I'm not necessarily sure it needs it. It's certainly plenty snappy and agile enough as it is, but this build spec is certainly high quality. It's not necessarily the absolute highest of quality that you could possibly get. There's a few kind of cost-saving measures put in there just to keep things a little bit more realistic and stop it going into that 5-figure price category. But yeah, Fox Factory suspension, the 38 170mm travel up front with a DHX2 coil in the rear. It doesn't come with the SLS spring as standard. That's something that I've had to put on there to handle my weight. But yeah, not a totally expensive upgrade, and it also helps to shave a few grams. It's a full EXO transmission drivetrain, as you would expect from that name. It's got a Code RSC brake set, and then there's a nice DT Swiss EX1700 wheel set, which as standard is wrapped in a pair of Maxxis EXO Plus tires, Nasky front, DHR2 rear, but number one, I initially tested the bike with these tires and I managed to get a rear flat that totally ripped off the tire pretty damn quickly as soon as I took it into some aggressive rocky terrain. And also number two, I don't necessarily agree with EXO tires or EXO Plus tires for a bike in this travel category. So I swapped them out for some super burly, super downhill Schwalbe Taki-chan tires in ultra soft compound for a recent trip up to Whistler to hit the bike park, and they proved to be the ticket to give me the grip and the confidence that I needed. But anyway, enough about the tech specs. Let's talk about the thing that really matters. How has the Yeti SB165 performed in the long term on the trails? Okay, so let's talk about why I'm saying the SB165 may just be my bike of the year. Of course, plenty of year still left and some more bikes on the way to try and challenge it, but basically the thing that has really stood out to me on the 165 is just how versatile it is, and how, while it doesn't necessarily do anything the best, it comes pretty damn close across the spectrum. whether it be long pedally days, in challenging enduro terrain. It's not a cross-country trail bike by any means, but it certainly handles itself well for the pedaling side of things. But then when it gets to the downhill, I mean, I've had this bike in Whistler, I've been riding some of the most aggressive rocky terrain around here in Central Oregon, and it doesn't seem to matter what I put this thing down. It just provides a suitable tool, a comfortable tool, just generally exciting ride wherever I've been taking it. And it's certainly been a lot of fun. Talking about that climbing performance, so being a Yeti, generally suspension performance when you're pedaling is pretty excellent. I would say that even though this is coil sprung, it is still definitely on the more efficient side of things when you're pedaling. When you're seated, there is still a little bit of bob, but it's just because of how sensitive that rear end is. Certainly in terms of feeling of wasted efficiency, wasted energy while you're pedaling, this bike is not a bike that feels really soggy and sluggish. Even once I stuck on these Schwalbe Taki Chans in the ultra soft compound, which are not a super fast rolling tire, I was still happy covering ground, and it definitely doesn't feel like a bike that's really being held back on the way up the hill compared to some of the mid-travel trail bikes even. It's really impressive. The overall weight is not super light, but given its overall capabilities, the coil rear shock, and now a suitable burly set of tires, is definitely reasonable, and definitely impressive what Yeti has managed to do with it there. The seated position is nicely balanced. A 77-degree effective seat tube angle is fairly typical these days. Of course, being that the actual angle is slightly slacker than the effective, when you get up to my saddle height with 200mm dropper with 3 or 4 inches showing outside of the frame, you do end up slightly slacker than that effective seat tube angle quoted, but it's by no means a bike that I feel like I'm way off the back over the rear axle on, especially once you push that saddle forward in the rails. It's definitely a comfortable seated position, well balanced, and there's enough weight on the front wheel to keep things in check on all but the steepest of terrain. And even still, when you get to the steepest stuff, it's not a bike that I've felt like it's wandering all over the place on the front end. There's still plenty of weight on there to keep things in check and keep you pointing in the right direction. Definitely a comfortable climbing rig, and not one that I would shy away from a big day in the saddle on at all. This pedaling efficiency carries on to when you're trying to hammer on the way down the hill as well. It's still nicely efficient and supportive feeling when you're pedaling in the higher gears, going faster on the way down the hill. It's definitely a bike that I could see doing well in an enduro race scenario. It's going to give you plenty of support, not only in the suspension for pumping and working the terrain, but also when you do go to hit the finish line and put down some watts, it's going to give you plenty of support there. And really, in terms of its overall pedaling character, there's not a huge amount that I would change. Of course, you could always ask for it to be, 2, 3, 4, whatever pounds lighter. But being realistic with, the current state of how bikes are able to be manufactured and the stiffness and strength that they're able to get for a certain weight, I think Yeti is one of the leaders there in delivering overall strength and stiffness for a reasonably low weight. And even with a reasonably burly alloy wheel set, a full alloy drivetrain, you could shave a little bit of weight with a carbon crank or whatever, but I don't see the need. It's all certainly purposeful stuff, and it's been an absolute pleasure to ride so far. But climbing is one part of the equation on an enduro bike, of course, and realistically, unless you've got a shuttle, it's going to be where you're spending most of your time. But it's the descending performance that people care about most, including myself, on an enduro bike. So let's talk a little bit about its character on the way down. Being a Yeti, it is definitely not just a bike that you want to dip your heels on and ride the most rough and rugged terrain without feeling anything. There is a certain level of support and feedback in the suspension that keeps you, a little bit more engaged, but also I feel like it gives you a little bit more control of what's under the tires, a little bit more feeling there, as well as being able to really let you work the terrain, pump through rollers for speed, and it generally rides a little bit more sharp than the absolute most muted, say the high pivot, super heavy bikes out there. It is just a little bit more engaging and generally a little bit more racy in feeling, I would say. That for me is a great thing, but I am still not a man who's completely immune to getting fatigued on a descent, so we took it to Whistler for a couple of days. I did 30 laps, and although the hands were certainly hurting a little bit after it, as I'm sure they would have on any other bike, there was not a single time that I felt like I was underbiked, and I feel like that is incredibly impressive for a 165, 170 bike, you know. Whistler Bike Park, riding double blacks like Schleyer, you're really pushing hard through steep, rough, big compressions, rocky terrain, and to feel like you can hang with downhill bikes on an enduro bike is quite impressive, and that is exactly how I felt on this thing. There was very few, if any, moments at all that I wished for anything else, but that's not to say that this is a bike that just needs to be pushed hard to have fun. Even on some of the flowier blues, crank it up, and even getting onto A-line, this bike is still super engaging. Like I say, you can work the terrain for speed, it rolls pretty quickly, it's nice and light, and there's still an element of pop left in that suspension, so you can play about on it as well. And I think, like I said earlier, as a bike that can do everything almost as well as anything else, the SB165 is absolutely that bike. And regardless of the trail scenario that I've been on this thing, as long as it is in the more aggressive camp, as you would expect to be pushing a coil-sprung enduro bike, this bike has proved to be a huge amount of fun. Talking about the build spec, I think Yeti's done a great job of putting together a sensible but, you know, premium quality build. Price tag $9,300 is, you know, it's no small amount of money, but you know, there's nothing that I would want to change on this bike out of the box. And, you know, I feel like for anyone in the market for a high quality enduro bike like this, I feel like they're going to feel the same, because it's all sensibly selected, very well performing. Everything's held up remarkably well. Obviously had to give the rear wheel a bit of love after a couple of days in the bike park, and the alloy nipples on it did not feel like the most reassuring thing with the spoke key. As I've found in the past, they can round out quite easily if you're not careful. You know, if your spoke key doesn't fit them perfectly, then they're not the strongest things compared to a brass nipple. But aside from that, everything is trucking on very well, and after a lot of abuse and minimal maintenance, it's doing great. The frame pivots have all stayed pretty tight through a huge amount of abuse. The wheels have stayed true, and even the brakes are working good still after, yeah, definitely relying on them a lot to slow me down. So the Yeti SB165 has absolutely been a bike that I've loved testing, and really, I think every other bike has the work cut out to match it this year. But of course, you should subscribe to the channel, check out the other reviews that are going to be coming to see if anything can tip this to the best overall bike of the year for me. And give us a like if you've enjoyed this video, and leave us a comment. Let us know what you think of the Yeti SB165. Thank you for watching. Catch you out on the trails.